startup. And I'm going to talk to you about sensor data security. I'm getting a bit more technical today than the other talk was. Right. The mobility market is going through a huge diversification at the moment. So we have new opportunities coming up every day, and with bike sharing, ride sharing, car sharing, and many more in addition to traditional transport methods like public transport or private car use. Intermodal travel actually becomes the norm more and more, especially for young people in urban areas. So, so to understand how people travel and how they combine all those different means of transportation, we need a way to measure that. And here, MotionTag does that by using smartphone sensor data and automatically recognizing the user's activity. So let me show you what that looks like in our showcase lab. When now I go to work, I'll first go to the subway station, then I take the subway, switch over to the commuter train, then take the commuter train, and walk the last meters to my office in Schöneberg. And in the app you can just see where you were and what activity you were doing, so what transport mean you were using, and then check if that was correct and actually give feedback so we can improve our algorithms. So today I want to dive a bit deeper into how we do that and what steps you have to take when you want to do something similar. So basically, transport mode detection would be a more special case of activity recognition. Basically, activity recognition is taking sensor data, taking raw data, like the GPS data here drawn on the left-hand side, and then find out what activity someone was performing at a certain time. So as you can see here, when was I walking, when did I use the subway? Alright, and we are not actually the only ones doing that. There are a lot of research papers on that subject, going back at least to 2003. Back then people didn't use smartphones, as you would probably think, but instead used GPS sensors or accelerometer hardware sensors to do that. And normally research papers focus on one thing, like one algorithm that can do that, or one sensor information that I'm interested in, like GPS would be one. And the steps we need to take are actually always the same. So first we need to do data acquisition to read the sensor data. Then we need to remove outliers, filter the data, maybe interpolate. So that's called preprocessing. Then we want to do some segmentation to normally cut the data in pieces that we want to handle and that we want to put classes to. So one class would be I'm walking. So maybe I'm using 30-second slices here in the talk. And then we do feature extraction. So feature extraction means I want to compute more meaningful numbers from my raw data. So one feature could be the maximum speed of a 30-second slide. And here I can also use GIS data as an enhancement. So for example, if I know where the next train station is, I can determine that distance that could help me to distinguish between a car and a train. In the end, I use the features to train a classifier, and the classifier in the end, once I've trained it, will do all the other work for me. I'll just give it the features and it tells me what activity I was doing. And then afterwards, you want to do some post-processing. So you have all the 30-second slides, you still need to aggregate them back together. Maybe you want to do some map matching to make it look good on a map. So your points are actually on the road and not next to it. And basically, that's the steps we need to take, and I will go into more detail about the data acquisition, about outlier detection, and classification in general, and skip the other points in this talk. So when we look at smartphones today, there's a lot of sensors that we can use, that we can read. I think for activity recognition, the first sensor you probably think of, or the first two are GPS and accelerometer. Obviously from the GPS I can compute the speed, and the speed tells me a lot of my transport mode, and the accelerometer tells me how much I'm accelerating. But there's a lot of other sensors that maybe you wouldn't think of, but that can be helpful too, and that have been studied in the literature. To name two, one is Bluetooth. Bluetooth has been studied to determine if someone is on a bus. Because when you're on a bus, you have a lot more Bluetooth devices around yourself than when you're in the car. Or actually, the likelihood is higher. Another one that could be interesting is the microphone. So it could actually help you to detect characteristic noises of trains when you start and stop. Obviously, in an openly available application, you don't really want to use the microphone for private reasons. But there's always a trade-off between data collection, collecting data in a high frequency and in a high quality, and not draining the phone's battery. If you drain the phone's battery, that means, first of all, you don't record for full days, so you don't get the full picture. Second of all, if that's an application that you actually want people to use, they won't use it if your battery is drained within hours. So what you have to do is find out how to use the less draining sensors like the accelerometer more of the time, and then only use the location-based parameters sensors when you really need them. I think the two main smartphone operating systems that we need to talk about are Android and iOS. And the challenges we face when we want to do activity recognition are actually very different for both of those systems. For Android, the positive thing is that it's very open accessible. It's also used by most researchers. You can directly access most of the sensors and then do all your computations yourself. The bad news is there's so many devices using Android, and many of them actually don't have that great sensors, that if you want to do activity recognition for a broad range of devices, it's actually really hard to do, because many of them won't carry the sensors at all, or they have sensors that are actually very bad quality. With iOS, it's the other way around, more or less. So you don't have many devices, and the older ones to know we don't even have to think about, because iPhone users switch to a new smartphone every 2 years. And all of them are quite good quality. There's no such thing as a low-end iPhone. But you only can access your data at a very high abstraction level. You never get access to the raw data. And normally it's quite a fight against the operating system to keep your app alive in the background at all. Now let's look at so when we have a look at smartphone location in general, that doesn't necessarily mean GPS, it just is a location that can be derived from GPS or from Wi-Fi triangulation or from GSM triangulation. What I normally get as a developer is a coordinate and an accuracy. And here I've drawn such a coordinate with the radius of its accuracy. And it's accurate up to 48 meters, and what we would normally think that means is that somewhere in that red circle there is my true location. Now, when you have a look at the Android documentation, you find out that's actually not the case. It only means you have a 68% chance that your true location is inside that circle. So it leaves you with 30% chance to actually be outside that circle. Now you could think in real life it's probably much better than that. Well, let's have a look at a real life example. This is the same kind of picture. I've scaled the points by the accuracy. As you can see at the bottom of the picture, we have 3 dots, 3 locations that clearly are outliers, but they have an accuracy of about 30 meters. So what we can learn from this is that if we want to filter our data and remove outliers and we purely rely on the reported accuracy, we won't actually have much luck. We will still have outliers like that one, or those 3 actually in our data. And on the other hand, when we look at train rides, where we don't get good data at all, because trains run very fast, then removing all inaccurate points, say all points that have an accuracy of bigger than 50 meters, then we are not left with any data at all, which is not a good thing either. So I want to introduce you to one method that can detect outliers without relying on the reported accuracy. That's called local outlier factors. The idea of local outlier factors is to compare the density of each point with the density of its k neighbors, where k is a fixed number, in this example it's 3. So the density depends on the distance to the next point. So in this example here, you see the gray points are my data, and the red point is an outlier. So as you can see, the 3 next neighbors for each of the gray points are quite close. They have a high density, whereas for the outlier, they all have a big distance and therefore very low density. Now with this method, you will get a score for each of the points, and then points with a high local outlier factor are likely to be outliers, whereas points with a low score are likely to be inliers. Now the question is, which score do I start to cut off? Which score do I start to remove my data and say they're outliers? And that's actually quite a challenge, and you have to look at your data to find the right trade-off. The other parameter here is k, so you have to think about how many neighbors do I want to take into account. If k is too low, then, as in the example before, if you have a lot of outliers in one place, which actually happens more often than you would hope, then you won't detect them. But on the other hand, making k big becomes computationally very expensive, because computing the k nearest neighbors is actually a hard problem. So you have to find the smallest k that you can still compute and that fits your needs, and also think about a good implementation. Now, looking back at the example, I've marked all the outliers detected by having a high local outlier factor. And as you can see, without looking at the accuracy at all, we've detected all the outliers here in the example. Now, having dealt with outliers and with segmentation, we can dive into classification. But before that, we actually have to think about what classes we want to distinguish. So here, I've drawn in color the classes that we deal with at MotionTag. So that's walking, cycling, driving, and buses, and then all sorts of rail modes, like regional train, subway. But there's more activities you could think of, and that's been dealt with in literature, like fitness activities like running and jumping, or dancing. And there's also other transport modes, and some of them we actually want to include in the near future. That would be a coach or an airplane. Airplane shouldn't be too hard to detect from speed, but then most people wouldn't use their phone on the airplane, or actually not allowed in most planes. So once we've decided which type classes we're using, we can think about meaningful features and to do our classification. And for that, normally we want to record a lot of data where we know the activity and collect the data, and then do all the steps that I've described. So do the outlier detection and compute our features. So to name 3 meaningful features here that would help us is average speed, maximum speed, and the distance to the next train station. But obviously you want a lot more. And then you divide all the data that you've recorded into a training set and a test set. So the training set is normally 80% of your data, more or less, and the test set would be the remaining 20%. And then you feed all those features together with a known activity into a machine learning algorithm. There are many machine learning algorithms that you can use and that are suitable, and I won't actually go into detail here. If you want to know more about that, you can talk to me later. But basically they all work the same. You feed them with the data, they build a classifier, and then you use your test set and give the test data without the known activity into the classifier and compare the real activity to the activity that the classifier has found out. And then by that you can measure how good your classifier is, and if you're happy with it, then you can actually use it to classify new data. Now, one thing you need for that is a lot of data. And so I've listed here just a few examples from the literature of how much data they collected. As you can see, that ranges from 7 hours to 150 hours. Normally, they don't use more than three different devices, which, to be fair, research really makes sense, because if you want to focus on your algorithm, then you don't want too much noise, I would say, in your data by using different sensors. Also, how big your sample size should be depends on how many time classes you have, and yeah, exactly, and how many devices you have. From the work we've done in the past, we've collected over 60,000 hours of data, and we're targeting over 200 smartphones for Android and iOS. Outlier works better for some and not so good for others. But because we're trying to make this work for so many different devices, we actually need a lot of data. So to sum up, what I've talked about was the sensor collection. So we've talked about what sensors could be useful, how to remove outliers by local outlier factors, and how in general supervised classification, supervised learning works. And now you will still have to do the post-processing, aggregating and trip spec, which actually is a whole story itself. It's not that easy to do. And then you can use, for example, map matching to make that look good on a map. Now we've combined all that knowledge in our app, which will be, at the moment it's a beta version, but will be available in the App Store and the Play Store soon. And we've used that method in the past for market research and transport research, and we're continuing to do that, but we actually have a great addition, and that's seamless traveling. So knowing where someone else is, where a person is, we can build an automated ticketing, which means your smartphone is your ticket, and you just use any train, any bus, maybe even any car sharing vehicle. You don't have to think about what fare zone am I in. I don't have to stand in line to buy a ticket at the ticket machine, and I don't have to carry any loose change with me. I simply have my smartphone, and at the end of the day, I get the best price. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions now or in the break.